Court TV Live, I'm Ted Rollins. Good to be with you as we kick off another busy week here at Court TV. The defense case underway in the burn pile murder trial for Melody Farris in Georgia. She's accused of killing her husband, Gary. Prosecutors say she shot Gary, then burned his body in a fire pit on the property. The jury viewed that property last week. The defense claims there's zero evidence that Melody possessed a gun or shot her husband or was able to lug his 300-pound body onto the burn pile. Her attorneys also say the state's own medical examiner couldn't confirm how Gary died. Let's go into court because a huge witness for the defense is on the stand. We've heard about her. Amanda Farris Bruce. She is Gary and Melody's oldest daughter, and she's the daughter that sides with mom. The others all believe mom killed dad. So let's listen into Amanda.
And what was your maiden name?
Farris, F-A-R-R-I-S.
So you are the daughter of who?
My father, Gary Farris, and Melody Farris.
So speak into the microphone.
Sorry.
We'll take our time. So Amanda, you are of the four children. Which are you? The oldest, the middle, the youngest?
I'm the youngest.
All right. About what year were you born?
1989.
All right. So you don't remember much of living. Do you remember at all living in Alabama?
I have images in my head of like our playroom, but no, I moved here in kindergarten.
All right. And that would have been to Alpharetta or Atlanta?
Yes, sir, Alpharetta.
All right. So kind of tell the jury a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Farris household.
Honestly, when I was a child, everything was normal. Lived in a home in Alpharetta, which was normal, and we all went to school in kind of the same area.
Where'd y'all go to school?
I went to Chattahoochee High School. Brothers went to Milton, and then my sister also went to Chattahoochee as well.
Okay. So tell me about kind of everybody's, this jury has heard your siblings testify throughout this trial. So this is your kind of chance to explain what you saw growing up. You know, everybody's personality. Tell us how Chris was growing up.
Chris and I had the biggest age difference. He was 10 years older than I was, so I don't really recall a lot of interaction between him. He was just like the oldest brother. Moved out early. I must have been in middle school when he went to college. Scott, from our childhood when we lived in Alpharetta, like at Hampton Hall, he played football and he was a little bit more of an introvert. Chris was more of an extrovert. Emily, we were very close. We were 18 months apart, and so she was only a grade or two above me, and she was more introverted and I was a little bit more extroverted, but we were quite similar in ways.
Okay. So how was your parents' relationship back in those days?
Everything seemed about as normal. We didn't really take a lot of vacations or anything like that. We would go to the beach when my dad had a law seminar every once in a while, but looking back on it compared to what I do for my child, it was kind of just routine day in, day out things. Go to school, come home, clean house, wake up, do it all over again. So it was all very...
Did y'all have chores
normal.
Or how?
Oh, yes. We always had chores. Whether it be outside, inside, we had responsibilities, or at least I did.
Okay. So, the jury has heard quite a lot about, where everybody went in their life after they kind of graduated high school and the family began to grow up. So we'll start with you and then kind of tell me about your siblings.
Well, I graduated from high school and I went...
In 2008?
Correct, 2008, and immediately went down to Georgia Southern. Lived there for a couple of years, and then I actually moved back home, partially because I wasn't doing too well, and because my dad kind of wanted me to come home at that time. So
About what year would that have been?
2010. So I came back, and then I did some school at Georgia Perimeter College and finished up, got there, and kind of went into work at retail, and I found my love in retail. And
that would have been when you went to work for Tory Burch?
no, I actually worked for Victoria's Secret for a while, and then for an accounting firm, I was a server. I did a kind of, number of things, but eventually I found my dream job at Tory Burch, and they did a company restructure, and I didn't get to work there any longer because my sales position or my position at the company got eliminated. But then I worked at Club Monaco, which is a retail store at Lenox, and then I ended up having my son not too long after that. Well, I guess I worked in fine jewelry for a while too, for like 5 years, and then I had my son, and I had to get out of retail.
Okay. So it's safe to say, prior to you having your son, you've always worked.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. So tell me about Emily.
Emily, she graduated high school. She went to the University of Alabama, did really well there. She's always been really smart, always did really good in school. Graduated communications degree, I'm almost positive.
Okay.
And then that's when she met her husband, Chris Payne, and they ended up moving to Atlanta, lived here for a while, like in the Dunwoody area, and then I think he may have gotten a job up in Tennessee, and they got married up there. And that's, I guess, where they've been ever since.
All right. And then tell me about Chris.
Chris went to University of Alabama for a couple of years, maybe 3, I'm not sure. Did not finish, and then I really don't know how long after that he met Kimberly, and they ended up pregnant with Ella, and they got married. Moved up to Maine, had Addison, and then Chris came back after they got divorced or during the divorce, something like that. But he moved back here, and he's been back here ever since.
Okay. How about Scott?
Scott graduated high school, kind of worked odd jobs, I guess you would say, kind of like I did. And he worked at Jiffy Lube, he worked at car dealerships, he just kind of worked all over the place, honestly. And then he decided that he wanted to go into the Army, so he did that. I want to say, I know I spoke to him over the telephone, or not over the phone, but over chat, my freshman year of college. And he was not in there for very long. And next thing I knew, I did go out and visit him at the base in Texas for a little while. And when he had his girlfriend, Gina, who I later found out, I guess they were married. And then he came back here, from what I can recall.
Okay. So this phrase has been used, and it may be you that I heard it from originally, and I can't remember. But would it be fair to call your family the Ferris wheel?
Unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let's kind of get into that if we could, and kind of talk about, from your perspective, the personalities in the family and kind of the interplay of the siblings and the parents, and through the years how that kind of developed into 2018.
I wouldn't say that term really came along until we were adults. We were not in college or anything. I guess you could say we were in college, but there was always something going on.
Well, kind of give the jury a background of that, if you don't mind.
Chris, him and Kimberly got pregnant. They got married. They had their issues with their divorce, unfortunately. Scott going to the Army, getting out. He kind of just lived at home. He really didn't do much. Really kind of worked odd jobs all the time. I know he was working at the Nissan dealership when I got my car, and that would have my first and second car came from that same dealership, but I guess it was the first time. So that was a senior in high school. He was working there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, well, let me do this. Let's kind of work through personalities in this Ferris wheel. So let's start with Chris. What would you say Chris's personality is? And then give me some examples.
He was very extroverted. He was always the center of attention at, I could say at parties and things like that. But him and I, we were friendly. We were all friendly. We all got along. We all went to Christmas together, and we all were friends, I guess you would say, but we didn't know the inner workings of each other's lives. I don't know if I'm just kind of one of those people that likes to stay out of it, but I mean, there was just something always kind of going on. Everybody had their problems, but like my sister, she had her things, and her husband was in and out of trouble, but you know, Emily never did anything wrong. I think she is a great wife and a great woman. Scott, he just lived at home. Him and I really didn't get along. He was kind of aggressive towards me at times, but other times we were fine with each other. He was kind of a different character, but he was our brother.
What do you mean by that?
He was just very introverted. He didn't have a lot of friends. I don't know how to explain it. He just wasn't very much like us. But he just lived his own life, and we weren't involved with him. But we weren't involved with each other very much at all either. So it's like, it was what was it on the outside. It wasn't, we didn't really connect internally. So,
Okay.
I don't know.
And then how would you assess your personality?
I like to think I'm a loyal person. I'm a caring person. I always like to believe the best in people. I almost and I don't want to say a fault, because I think everybody deserves a friend in this world, but I can be very introverted at times. But I like to have who my friends are. I passionately love them, and I would be there for them. But I like to consider myself kind of where I stand in the middle, where I like to evaluate everything from the outside. But I like to stay out of a lot of drama.
Okay. So we keep kind of touching around the outsides of the drama, but would you say on a scale of 1 to 10 that your family pre-2018 was 1 being very boring, not dramatic, 10 being as dramatic as it gets? What number would you give it?
It's hard to say, because that was our normal. I think there was always something going on in everybody's life. I tried to, all of this, I was just trying to get married and fall in love with the man that I wanted to marry. And my world got turned upside down. And I was just very much one of those, like, everybody else's problems are their own and I can't fix it. But it was tough. It's really hard to explain, but everybody had trauma and trouble and issues.
You use the past tense when you're talking about your siblings. Why is that?
We don't talk anymore.
They don't talk to you.
Communication is a two-way street.
So when's the last time you talked to your siblings?
Had to be probably end of 2019.
Okay. And why do you believe that is?
This had something to do with it, but we had our own falling outs individually that I kind of refreshed my memory when I knew this was all happening, and reading through text messages and things like that. But Chris and I had a falling out a year prior. My husband and I always go to Lake Lanier Islands for the 4th of July. My husband grew up in that area and worked there for a very long time.
At Lake Lanier Islands?
At Lake Lanier Islands. So that was our tradition. We did it every year, ever since I knew him.
This would be the big beach at Lake Lanier?
Yeah, like what's now Margaritaville.
Okay. And we're going to talk about the 4th in 2018 in a minute.
This was
This is what you guys did every year.
Yeah, but I'm talking about 2017.
Okay.
So we invited Chris and Jenna and the girls to come up with us to celebrate the 4th of July. And it ended up where we had spent the entire day out there, and they were drinking heavily. And we went to the Mexican restaurant on Friendship Road, and I pulled the girls in the bathroom, and I was like, listen, I can't let you drive with them. I was like, it's not safe. So they agreed, and we got in the car and we took them back, as they were staying at Lake Lanier Islands Resort that night, and took them back and Shortly after that, I called my parents. No, that night, could have been a couple of days, I don't remember. But I told them, I said, Chris has a problem. He has a drinking problem, and those girls are gonna get in an accident, and something bad's gonna happen to them or somebody else. Well, it wasn't too long after that my brother decided to call my parents, and specifically my father, and say that he was having an affair with my mother. And accused, and that was pretty much from then on out. I never felt the same about Chris.
And so that was right.
All right, let's get a break in here. And this is family drama at the highest level, and this case is all about the family drama. Who do you think is responsible for Gary's death? Let's get a break. When we come back, more testimony from the daughter. Melody Farris is on trial. Mom accused of killing dad. This daughter says she didn't do it. Stay with us.
We want to understand the mindset behind your actions in this case. Tell me, why are you here?
She needed payback.
Payback with her life?
Very funny, really. I'm laughing. Did you see me? I laugh.
I don't want any of this. Are you not prepared today to take responsibility for any of your crimes?
Interview with a Killer, a Court TV original series. Sunday, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
I'm Matt Johnson in North Georgia covering the burn pile murder trial. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Welcome back. It's getting real good in this trial. Amanda Farris is on the stand. She is the youngest of the siblings, and she's the one sibling of the four that believes in Mom. She believes that Melody, her mother, who's on trial, didn't kill Gary and throw him into the burn pile. She hasn't gotten to that point in her testimony, but she's laying the groundwork. This is a defense witness. We're in the defense's case. Let's go back into the courtroom and pick it up right where we left off.
And so that was right around the 4th of July, 2017.
Correct.
Was this also the time were you aware of him threatening to kill your mother?
That happened after.
Okay.
I kind of pieced it all together because I hear bits from people, but you know, nobody tells me directly. Honestly, when that happened, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to be involved. I thought that was something that my parents should handle. They were the parents, they needed to handle it, and that's why I went to them about his problem, and because it wasn't my place to tell him he had a problem, and it was theirs as his parents. And I don't know if that was a result of that.
Did you know that it had almost a similar situation about Chris trying to leave with the girls, intoxicated? Did you know about that? When he made the threat?
I slightly recall something of the sorts. I just remember telling my parents that the girls should not be driving with them if they were going to be drinking like that. And it was if it came to the point of me saying something to my parents, there was a reason. I did not feel like they were safe.
And so let's be clear. At that point, Chris, instead of stopping drinking or taking accountability for his actions, he decided to say that your fiance was having an affair with your mother.
That's what I can assume.
Okay.
Because there's no other reason for him. My husband was good friends with Scott and Chris before this. They went to an SEC football championship game together. Chad and my dad had a fantastic relationship before all of this happened. We went out there almost every weekend to have dinner with them. And we were there on his birthday on June 27th before he died, and we were the only ones there.
And we are gonna talk about that weekend. So I want to back up too. I mean, so that's you brought up Chris and you brought up that incident, and we may just have to talk about moments in time that come back, because I understand that what you're currently going through in this moment is awful.
Yes.
And this is a very patient jury, and so we will get through it, okay?
Okay.
But let's go back and let's talk about Scott. I want to talk about, he gets back from Iraq. Can you tell me about any specific instances you remember? You mentioned anger and things like that. Can you talk about that for the jury?
I mean, he was just very protective over the farm, and I never understood why we called it a farm, because it was a glorified petting zoo at most. But so Sorry.
They know. They've seen it.
Sorry, we had a lot of animals growing up, and this was like that on steroids. It made no sense.
Well, then how did we wind up there? How did the family get to the farm?
That would be a great question. Ask my daddy. Because I don't know. There was a lot of things that happened before that moment that I think should have been taken care of before just putting money on it to fix it.
Okay.
I think a lot of things that have happened in our family get swept under the rug, and they're never addressed, and they're not taken seriously. But a sin is a sin, and I feel like this is a repercussion of all the sins that were committed over years, unfortunately.
This is sins by everybody in the family?
Everybody, false money idols. It was always what it looked like on the outside. It never mattered what it was on the inside. There was many things growing up, like we weren't. Our parents didn't really, I mean, they cared, but like, you had to figure it out for yourself. It wasn't, let me walk you through this. Let me show you how to do this. I don't feel like it was ever that moment. So we kind of had to fend for ourselves a little bit in that aspect.
Okay. Well, let's talk. Let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about your mother. Let's talk about it. Growing up. I mean, it seems like, you know, the jury's seen messages between you guys. It seemed like you guys were pretty close.
She was my mom, yeah.
All right.
She is my mom.
Right.
You know, I've always cherished we had a great family growing up. It seemed like everything was normal. We lived in a great house, and Alfreda went to a good school, had never wanted for anything, or never needed for anything, I guess I should say. We were given everything. My dad provided everything.
Let's talk about your dad, and I'm bouncing now too. What was your dad like?
He was great.
Take your time. I feel like we've been in this trial for a while.
He was a very smart man. I'm sorry. There was no doubt in my mind he loved all of us. He made that known, and he was very sarcastic.
Lawyers are notorious for that.
He had the lawyer personality for sure, but I mean, he was the dad that you walk down the stairs and he'd whistle and go, "You're a movie star." Or when Emily had her baby, he texted me a picture of me holding Olivia, and he goes, "You're natural." Like, he was just so loving, and I can still.
Take your time.
He was just such a big man, and he'd come and he'd just wrap his arms around you. But then in this sense, he'd turn around and fart on you, and you'd just be like, he was sweet, and he was witty. He could say things that cut you to the bone. He definitely demanded respect in that aspect, I guess you would say. I was always fearful of him in the sense that I wanted to respect him and I wanted him to be proud of me. And when he would make comments that I was not doing as well as I should, I took that to heart, and I really wanted to make him proud.
All right, Amanda, talking about the whole family. Sudi Jimenez is with us. What's your take on this defense witness? We've heard about her for the whole trial. The other siblings have all gotten into that box and told different versions of the same story. Does this move the ball?
I think so, absolutely. I think that what this is giving the jury is an insight into the dynamics of the family, how there's drama, like in every family, getting them to understand. But regardless of that, there is no way my mom would ever do this, and there is another person who all of the red flags point at the type of person that would do this because of the problems that they have, because of the baggage that they have. But my mom, even though her flaws of having a extramarital affair, maybe not getting along with my dad, that doesn't raise it to the level of committing a gruesome murder like this. And the other thing that's very important, I think something that they're doing very well, the defense, is this daughter loves her father as well. So it is not I'm siding with mom and this is mom versus the family. No, I love everybody, and then putting in the little nuggets there that it wasn't her, and I know who it was, and I love him too, but it was probably him.
Right, yeah, it's a good point that she's not trashing dad at all, contrary to doing the opposite. All right, let's get a break and get you back into the courtroom for more of Amanda Farris Bruce on the stand. Stay with us. Welcome back to Court TV Live. Glad to have you along with us on this Monday. We want to head back to Georgia for more of the Melody Farris case. She's accused of shooting and killing her husband, Gary, then burning his body in a fire pit on their property. The defense points to the couple's son, Scott, or maybe another one of the adult children as possible suspects. We're listening to the testimony from the defendant and the victim's youngest daughter. This is Amanda, the one we've heard about all trial long. She's the one sibling that thinks that mom didn't do it. Let's go back into the courtroom.
He was a good dad. He was a good grandfather, and I wish my son could have seen that.
Could you tell the jury what his relationship was like with Chris, for example?
I mean, I never saw them really do much together, I guess you would say, but I mean, Chris was grown. I don't know much about their relationship when they were younger. I don't really recall. I know that they were in a lot of fights over the past years about money.
Could you explain that to the jury? Best you can remember.
The best I can remember. I mean, it sounds awful, but I mean, he had issues with taking money, and he expected, he always had his hand out, but I don't doubt that he didn't love my daddy. I approach things differently than my siblings did.
What does that mean?
Meaning I never wanted anything in return for his love. Especially right before he died, I just wanted a mother and a father, and that was it. I didn't want any more of the drama. I didn't want any more of their marital problems. I didn't want to deal with any of it. I just wanted a mom and a dad, and I wanted to get married, and I wanted them to watch my kids grow up.
Okay. So, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I think I heard in regards to Chris was he didn't have a very close relationship with your dad that you noticed. That I noticed.
I mean, it was all about the same. I mean, they'd have conversations at Christmas, but I don't know if he ever went out and had dinner with him. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see it. They may have, but my dad and I would meet up, and because I lived in Roswell, Buckhead area, and he would call me and he'd be like, "Hey, I'm leaving the office. You want to go meet at Cheesecake Factory?" And I'd say, "Yeah, let's go." And it would be just him and I. And so I don't know if they had that or not. I really don't know.
But you did know. And how did you know that he was stealing money from your dad?
Well, my mother made it very apparent. There was never any dirty laundry that both of them weren't willing to air out to all of their children.
So
there was
your
no
dad
boundary.
would do that too?
Yeah.
So he would say, "Chris is stealing from me."
Correct.
Okay. And was that in the months and weeks leading up to his death?
Years.
For years?
It's been a problem for as long as as the girls have been around, as far as I'm concerned.
How would your brother do it? You say steal from him. How would that happen?
It was all things that I was told, whether it be my mom, mostly my mom, because I don't think my dad really liked to talk about those problems. He liked to complain to me about my mother. But I mean, it was well known that he would take checks and he would cash them. He would take credit card numbers and he would use the numbers off of them. Just always needing stuff for the girls.
Always had his hand out. I don't know how else to say it.
But Emily didn't do stuff like that, right?
She needed help from him. I think it was mostly for her husband. I know that she moved into her house in Thompson Station, and she would have not gotten that without him. He co-signed on an apartment in Atlanta because they couldn't get that on their own. But my dad co-signed for many things. Like, he co-signed on my second car. He didn't pay anything for it, but he co-signed on it. So
he was just helping out the kids in that regard.
You had to ask for it, but he was not just going to willingly give it out. But you definitely had to ask for it.
Okay. Well, speaking of asking for it, were you familiar in any way of how Scott would be paid or how he worked on the farm? Do you know anything about that?
They moved out there, and when they were, I never really understood why they bought the house.
Did you ever hear, I'll stop you to ask this question, did you ever hear that it was going to be kind of your mom and your dad's fresh start? Did you ever hear that?
That's what I assumed it had to have been, because we had a come to Jesus meeting about it, and we both knew. I said, you know what this is, you know who she is, you know who you are. I need you to make a decision. I was in a relationship with a loser for quite some time, and they both came down and got me out of that relationship, and him and I were at Tacos and Tequilas in Buckhead, and I said, Daddy, you know, if this is the hard decision I had to make, you need to make that decision too. You need to be happy. I mean, I would text them when they would say, oh, Daddy, you know, Mama would send me something, a screenshot, or being mad with Daddy, and I'd be like, y'all need to figure this out. Like, y'all are gonna have a heart attack one day. Or like Daddy would complain about something, and I'd be like, y'all need to figure it out. This is not my problem. It's just, I thought of that Purcell house as they both knew what they were getting into. And at that point, my hands were off of it. And I said, that's y'all's problem.
Okay. So tell me if I'm wrong, because they're just going off the way you just said this. But it sounds like your parents, this is just how they were.
Yes.
And when I say the way they were, the kind of the way that they would just kind of bicker and complain about each other, that was just a two-way street, and that's what they did. That's how they communicated.
Yes. And that's what they both accepted and wanted to do.
That's what they wanted to do.
Yes.
That was
my dad
norm.
told me, he said, I love her, and I'm not leaving her. So that was his choice, not mine. He knew my opinion.
Okay. But those strange maybe to the outside world, to them,
that was their choice.
that was life.
They were both adults. They knew exactly what they were doing.
So back to Scott, and how did it come to pass that he wound up on the farm that you knew of?
Because he couldn't make it on his own. It was kind of a running joke that he just was always going to, he'd complain that, oh, Mama told me to do this, or Daddy told me to do that. And I'm like, well, move out. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, don't live with your parents. They always said, oh, I'm going to work on the farm, or I work on the farm, and things like, yeah, he did. I mean, I guess, but so did my dad, so did my mom. It was a kid that was living at home. And that was about it.
Do you think he was taking advantage of them?
I think anybody who asks their parents for money over the age of 20, 25 are taking advantage of people. Okay. I think it's a moment in a person's life where you have to say, I'm an adult, I need to grow up.
Okay. Do you, did you know about kind of his daily life, about him just playing golf and not really actually working on the farm very much?
It was off of what I was told.
Okay. Nothing you saw?
No. I mean, he was out there. When I went out to visit my parents, you couldn't go on the property without him he'd come up right in it immediately. But like, he would see what was going on, and then he would leave, and he would go back. Like Christmas, or even dinners on weekends when we would go. He would come in, make his plate, and he'd go back to his little apartment. And that was like the most we saw of him. And
like, he would take the plate and go back to the barn apartment?
Yeah, he never
wouldn't sit with the family.
No. Occasionally he would sit at the bar stool, like in the kitchen, but.
And this is Scott, not your dad?
Correct.
Okay. If you had to say which kids were closest to which parent?
I mean, my dad and Emily always had a really good relationship, but she lived in Tennessee, so that's kind of hard to judge.
Sure.
My husband is a really big advocate of family, and looking back on it, I didn't have that lovey-dovey family relationship that everybody grew up with, and I wanted to cultivate that, and I made an effort to spend that time with my parents. So we would go out there almost every weekend and have dinner with them. And I mean, I was looking back through our text messages, and it felt like every weekend, baby girl, when am I going to get to see you? I'll be up there this weekend. So I really tried to get as close as I possibly could, but my dad was really hard to get close to. He was very shut off to a certain point. But I think he did that because we were his kids. I think it was different for the other people.
Like what other?
All right, more of the family drama being described to this jury by Amanda Farris Bruce. Sudi Jimenez is with us. She's clearly now just getting into Scott, the brother that the defense is pointing the finger at, where he'd come and make his plate and then scurry back to his apartment. And at the end of the day, does the jury need to think, because they've seen Scott, he took the stand, and is it a risk? If at the end of the day a juror's like, well, I don't think Scott did it, so she must have done it. Or do you think it's a good strategy because now you don't know if there's any reasonable doubt that maybe Scott did it? Pointing the finger at Scott is a good or bad strategy?
They have to do it because they're doing the Sodi defense. Some other dude did it, right? And you can't do that without actually having information as to who could have been. You're not gonna start saying, well, it could have been a burglar, it could have been just, a random passerby. No. In order to raise that defense, you have to have at least some evidence for it to come in. They might be going a little too much into it because at this point, it feels a little cringe because if she's so credible, and she's convinced me already, she's so credible that they can still arrest him. They can still arrest your brother. There is no statute of limitations on murder. If they believe they have enough evidence, is it more likely than not that he did it? They can start the case against him at any time, and that would be even more tragedy for this family. I hope they don't. I hope that after, most likely it's going to be an acquittal, after the defense wins this case, the state just lets it go and moves on and realizes that this family has suffered enough.
Okay, Sudi Jimenez forecasting an acquittal in the burn pile murder case in Georgia. Let's get a break and we'll get more from Amanda on the stand. She's talking a bit about Scott, and that discussion is going to continue as the state continues to present their case in chief. Stay with us.
We are in Georgia for the trial of a wife who's accused of killing her husband and then burning his remains.
When you see the opportunity and the motive, money, sex, new life.
Gary Farris was a very prominent Atlanta attorney.
It is common knowledge that they had affairs. Defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
The Burn Pile Murder Trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Welcome back. Let's head back to Georgia and the case against Melody Farris. She's accused of shooting and killing her husband, Gary, back in 2018. This was some time ago. Then burning his remains in a burn pile on their massive property. Prosecutors said the couple had troubles big time in their marriage, and Melody ultimately killed him for money. If convicted, she could face the rest of her life in prison. Let's go back in, picking up the testimony from the defendant and the victim's daughter, Amanda Farris Bruce.
Would it have been different?
Like my husband would have conversations with him. They would have great conversations from what I heard. Like when we went over there for dinners, they'd go outside. My dad smoked cigarettes. Chad vaped at the time. They'd go outside and they would just chit chat. And they had great conversations. More than I could get out of him, I guess I should say.
Okay. So I want to start kind of moving into events in y'all's family life that would have been part of maybe the Ferris wheel, and get your version of the events to tell the jury. About the time you were in college, can you tell the jury about Ted Wiley? What you know about that?
Well, going back to my senior year of high school, my grandmother, my mother's mother, had open heart surgery. And she had to go up there and stay with her all the time. And my father would text me and tell my other siblings about Ted, and it was a speculation at first. And then it came to a point where my father would send me pictures of things that were not appropriate, that were possibly sent to my mother's phone. And at that point, I told him I didn't want to be involved and I didn't want to know. I felt like I was a child at that point and I didn't need to be involved, and I was very upset. So it ended up that it turned out really bad, and she went up there and was, I guess, I don't know if she was staying with him, I didn't ask. But my dad was at home and he was alone, and I was at Georgia Southern and I wasn't doing well anyways, and I said, I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna live with my dad. And I did. I came home and I lived, and it was not long after that that my mom came in and she decided to come back home. And at that time, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be involved. So I was dating a guy at the time. He had an apartment and I went and lived with him. One of the worst decisions I've ever made.
This was that loser you were telling us
That was
about.
that loser.
Okay. And so that's what you remember from that era?
From that era, yes.
But your dad knew about it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was...
And everybody else in the family?
Everybody knew about it.
Okay. And would you just, kind of earlier you said about kind of the bickering and the way that they would communicate, that just became part of everybody's life.
Yeah.
Would you give that same assessment to any extramarital relationships both your parents would have?
I didn't know of any extramarital affairs that my father had.
Okay. But even your mom, as far as how it just became accepted by the family and this was, though odd, this is how we live.
It was accepted because my father accepted it. I was just distinctly making a comment that was not the best about my mother to my father, and he got very mad at me. He said I was not to speak to her about her like that. And after that, I didn't talk to him about it, and I stayed out of it. And that's where I left it. It was his choice. So that was it. That was their normal. They accepted it. They knew what they were doing.
Okay. What about the other siblings? Did y'all talk about it at all?
Oh, yeah, we talked about it. They had far more anger for my mother, which I felt like I should have had, just because I feel like there were moments of manipulation in the sense of, like, I'd go up to Alabama with her, and I think that she would kind of use me as, like, oh, I'm going up with Amanda, and then I'd be left at home, or I don't know. It's all speculation. All I can do is assume. But I don't feel like things were not going the way that they should have. And I think sins were committed in that I think both of them needed to address. And they didn't. They refused to.
Okay. So, kind of moving back closer in time, is it fair to say that Scott and your mother were actually pretty close?
Oh, they spent almost every day together. They would go up to what is called, I think, Scottsdale Farms. Scott loved to decorate. He was always doing something, whether it be outside or inside the barn, or they were always together. They always went up to Cherokee Ranch. I mean, all of us did everything with my mom.
What does that mean?
We all had a relationship with her. And Chris took his girls to be with her all the time. I don't know if they necessarily I guess they did stuff together.
The girls basically, when Chris would get them from Maine, they would spend the vast majority of their time
Immediately they came over to my mother's.
And they would call her Grandma. Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay.
They spent all their time with my mother. She was great-grandmother.
Okay.
His great-grandmother.
And she keeps your son, correct?
She did.
Okay. Okay. So they were close. Did they ever fight? Any altercations?
I'm sure.
Well, what you would have known.
I think they would fight when my mother would call them out on their stuff, and they didn't like it. And I'm sure that they felt the same way about her. But I mean, there was always an underlying anger that never went away. I think we all knew what was there, and the betray and the mistrust there that never went away. But we did as Daddy did, and we just swept it under the rug, and we just kept moving. We just kept our family.
Okay. So let's move to 2018. Okay. Do you remember any of your dad's medical spells? They would call them episodes.
Yeah, I mean, he said he would get sick and he would have to lie down, whether it be for 24 or 48 hours. I don't know. He would tell me he didn't feel well, and I'd beg him to go to the hospital. I mean, you've got to figure this out. I mean, he was not the healthiest man. But he refused. I remember trying to get him off of cigarettes. I tried to get him to, at least vape. I know it's still terrible, but it's not cigarettes. And refused and stuck in his ways and drank Mountain Dews. But he refused to do anything about it, ever. And then the one that sticks out to me the most in 2018, it had to be a few months before he died, because we were supposed to go to our wedding venue, and he got really sick, and my mom had called me the night before and said that he was going into a diabetic shock or something, but something was wrong with him. And Scott was there. They were trying to get him to the hospital, and I didn't see him until the next day, but I walked in and he was perfectly fine, just sitting up. So it was a shock. I mean, even Chris brought him a Mountain Dew in the hospital. And
not even a diet Mountain Dew?
No.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there, and it was like, Daddy, I won't go to this wedding venue if you don't want me to. And he's like, no, baby girl, go. He was always, baby girl, go ahead and do it. Because I always asked his permission for everything. I was like, are you sure it's okay that I go with Mama to go tour this venue? And he said, yes, please go. And same venue, we ended up putting a deposit down, and we never got married there. So yeah, he was not in good health.
So I want to move into the summer of 2018. And so in that summer, you guys would pretty much go up there and have dinners every weekend.
Every weekend, almost, yeah.
And your now stepdaughter, Cameron, she'd go too.
Yeah, if she was with us, yes.
Okay. The jury they've met Cameron. And everything, how did it seem when you went that summer? Just normal?
Fine, it was just us there. Scott maybe come in once and leave, but Chris wasn't there unless the girls were there. Emily was in Tennessee, so she was never there. So it was just the four of us, 5 if Cameron went. My mom would cook, and we'd all eat dinner and stay till about 9, 10, and then go home.
So you, tell the jury about the weekend before, his birthday, from everything you can remember about that.
Well,
just that weekend. Who was there? What was going on?
The Saturday before, we had a big gathering in the house, and everybody was there. Chris, Scott, Emily, Chris Payne, Olivia, me, Chad. I don't think Cameron was there. She wouldn't have been there. And we just had dinner, and my mama cooked, and we had cake, and that was it. And we went home, and then Sunday.
Well, I'll ask you this. I mean, did everything seem normal?
Yeah. Our normal, yeah. Okay. Everybody gets along. We had a great time.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Sunday, the next morning, we woke up, and we went to go eat brunch. I don't know what time. Could have been near lunch time. We walked into Jay Christopher's over there, I think closer to their house. Emily was supposed to go back to Tennessee. I was asking to see if she would go with me and Daddy and my mom to go to a wedding store in Roswell to go look at dresses, and we ended up not going. And because she had to go back, and we had breakfast. Yeah, it was just a normal breakfast. I don't know. And then my dad's birthday would have been in the middle of the week, I guess it was. It was a weekday. And we invited everybody. I didn't invite my mom because I thought my dad wouldn't like it. Boy, was I wrong. He was very upset that I did not invite her.
Well, what day was that?
I don't remember. June 27th.
Okay.
But I don't
So the week before?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Chris texted at last minute, said he couldn't come. He said he was busy or something and he couldn't go. Scott didn't go. He was up there at the house, I guess, but he didn't go. So Chad and I had dinner with him at I can't remember the name of it, but it's a Cajun place in Roswell, off Roswell Road, I believe. And that was his last birthday.
Okay. So let's move on into July the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Things you saw and any interactions you had with your mother and Scott or anybody in the family at that time. So let's go to, did you talk to your mom at all on the 3rd that you can remember?
I can recall because I went through text messages. I'd worked that day, worked at a jewelry store, so I would have worked from 9 to 6. And I mean, I had texted her all the time.
And you remember y'all were kind of texting to some degree. Chris had either, how did it come to pass that Chris had convinced your dad to pay for his vacation? Did you know anything about that?
My mother had told me that Chris had booked another vacation. In my eyes, Daddy didn't go on vacation. Daddy loved to work. He just didn't do that. So it was kind of shocking. I kind of perceived it as Chris wanted a free hotel room or a condo in my eyes. But
your brother Chris, he offered, I believe, he was going to on this trip pay for all the food.
I don't know.
Do you believe him if I were to tell you that he said that? He was going to pay for all the food and the fishing and everything?
Doubtful.
Okay. Why would that be?
He never had any money to do that. He always had to ask for money for everything. He couldn't fly the girls in from Maine without help. So I don't see how that could have been possible.
Shock you that on the day of the 5th, after you guys had been investigated that day and you talked to Detective Hayes and Kuykendall, that he actually had to borrow $20 from Emily to get home? Did you ever hear about that?
No.
Okay. So you're talking to your mom some about that stuff that day and wedding stuff. Do you remember that?
Probably. At that time, I was in full wedding mode trying to plan our wedding because we had the deposit down at Vauxhall.
Okay. But did anything seem out of the normal that day?
No.
Just a normal life, normal communications with your mother?
I was in bliss. I was engaged. I was the happiest I've ever been.
Okay.
Everything was perfect in my eyes.
So the next morning, on the 4th, I believe you guys even had some phone conversations. Do you remember anything do you remember anything about that?
Well, we had picked up Cameron the night before because it was our time to have her come over. And so we drove up to Jefferson and got her and brought her home. And then we were going to Lake Lanier because that's what we do every year.
And you take your mom every year?
No.
Okay.
Since we were up there the weekend before, we'd asked I asked my mother and Chad asked my dad.
Okay.
And my dad did not want to go. And I told my mom, I said, if you want to go, you're more than welcome. But this is what we're doing. This is our plans.
Okay. What do you remember about inviting her?
I just invited her. I was just like, hey, we're going to go do this. If you want to do something on 4th of July, this is where we'll be. It's fun. It's a fun place.
What did she say?
I think she said, sure, maybe, yeah, I'll go. I mean, she had told me the weekend before she was going to go.
Okay. And then the morning of the 4th, you guys were texting about it and talking about it. Did anything seem weird or out of place?
No. We woke up and we went out there. It was super packed. So
this is Margaritaville.
Margaritaville, yep. The whole beach was packed. All the chairs were taken. And I called her and was like, hey, we're going to go back home and we're going to get our chairs and stuff because there's nowhere to sit. But we put up our little pop-up tent and saved a spot because we lived 5 minutes down the road, not even. And told her we were going to go get our chairs and come back. And I told her she needed to bring one if she had one. And then she said she was working out in the yard and that she would be there later. I said, okay.
And so she came?
Yeah, eventually around 12, 1 o'clock, I guess it was. It was later.
About noon?
Yeah,
okay.
I would say so.
Somewhere in there. How did she seem? How was her demeanor?
Normal.
What did y'all do?
We roasted on the beach for a while and then went to Land Shark Cafe and because it was unbearably hot, and then we ate lunch. She ate with us. Cameron was there. And we went back to the beach, sat there for a while. I don't know if we did any of the water slides or anything that day, but I think it was 5, 6 o'clock maybe. And Cameron was begging to go be with Addison. We were like, I don't know, because we had just picked her up the night before.
Would Cameron and Addison, they communicate to themselves via text?
Yeah, they were friends at that time, yeah.
Okay, so they'd already kind of figured out they're going back to Grandma's.
Yeah, they were essentially the same age. They like hanging out with each other.
Okay, so I guess Cameron told you, hey, I'm going back with Melody.
No, she asked. And Chad and I were like, I don't know, because we picked her up the night before. And we were like, I don't know. We really didn't want to, but she begged and begged. And so we were like, all right, for one night you can go out there. And Chad was supposed to work the next day, and I had the day off. So I was going to go, and I was like, I'll pick you up, and then we'll go shopping.
And that would have been on the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but back on the 4th, Cameron how did your mom respond when she asked to come over?
She said, okay, have you talked to Addison? And I don't know if my mother talked to Chris or not, but Cameron got in the car with her and they rode back.
Okay. Did y'all have any communication with Cameron that night or the next morning?
I probably wouldn't have. Chad would have.
Okay.
I was more or less, and I still am more or less, Chad's wife. She has a mom, and I didn't mother her by any means, so it would have been Chad that checked up on her.
Secondary parent role, step parent.
Correct.
Okay. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. So how did it come to pass that you were going to come the next morning and pick up Cameron? Because you were off that day?
I was off that day, so I knew I was going to have to go pick her up. But his father was living with us at the time. He had gotten in an accident and had to live with us because he was in the hospital for a while. So we took care of him. And he asked me that morning if I could drive him over to his friend Debbie's house. So I agreed and took him over there, and could have been 10:30 by the time I actually left the area. I'm not sure. But I drove directly over to my parents' house, and that's when I got there.
Okay, so somewhere between 10:30 and 11, you think?
Could have been. It was mid-morning.
All right, I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as Thrasher Exhibit 20. Was this the porch on your parents' house?
Yes.
All right. When you got there, what did you and your mom do?
She was sitting out on the front porch.
This porch?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there some chairs right over here?
There are rocking chairs.
Okay.
I pulled up in the driveway and I parked and walked up. I think the girls were out there at that time. I know they came out there at some point, but she immediately said, "We've been looking for your daddy and we don't know where he is."
She said that to you?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't bring up to her, "Hey, where's daddy"?
Not that I can recall. I just remember her bringing it up because I was like, I don't know.
Was that early in the conversation? Had you?
Yeah, it was like immediately once I got there.
Okay. Then what did you go do next?
Well, I started talking to her. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? She was like, I can't find him. And I was like, well, where? I mean, it wasn't unusual for them not to know where each other was at, but I was like, okay. And I kind of brushed it off. I was like, I wasn't worried about it. And so then she was like, no, really, like.
Did she seem nervous? Like.
Not nervous, but she seemed concerned.
Okay.
And I don't know if the girls were looking for him or whatnot. I have no idea. She just said that she could not find him. And I was like, what do you mean? I didn't understand. A lot about that day I didn't understand. But it wasn't long after Scott came up. Again, you don't go on that property and not show up immediately. And he came up and I asked him, I said, have you seen Daddy? And he was like, no, I haven't seen him. And so then it just escalated into, it's all kind of a blur, but it escalated into, we need to find him. And
Did Scott say anything else that was odd or weird?
Well, I don't know if it was when I decided to search the house and just walk through it, or like, I don't know which one came first, or like I know I called Chris, I know I called Emily, I know I called Angela, I know I texted him, I emailed him, I called him, and none of those nobody knew where he was. But at some point I decided, I was like, I'm gonna go look in the house, and I started in the upstairs, but before I stepped foot in that house, Scott looked at me and said, I'm gonna go look for a missing gun.
He said that to you?
He said that to me. And I remember.
As you're standing here at this door right here, this green door?
Yes.
Okay. And he just like grabbed you by the arm and said, I'm going to look for a missing gun.
All right, let's slip at a commercial break here. We'll get you back into the courtroom for more of this compelling testimony from Melody Farris's daughter on the stand, Amanda, talking about the crucial time where she arrived and they're looking for Dad, looking for Gary. Couldn't find him. Get you back in the courtroom for more after this. Back to Court TV Live, along with Julia Janae. I'm Ted Rollins. We are watching this case out of Georgia. The wife accused of killing her husband and burning his remains on this fire pit.
Underway right now in North Georgia. Prosecutors there say that Melody Farris shot and killed her husband, Gary, who was a prominent attorney. This happened back in 2018. She wasn't arrested until 2019. His remains were found on a burn pile on their property, and the defense says that the investigation is flawed. They don't think she could have moved him from the basement where some drops of blood and a projectile was found.
Yeah, it was 300 pounds. It's tough to move 300 pounds of dead weight for anybody, let alone a person of her stature and weight. That is a question that I think we all have. Is that, how did she get him out of the basement? The state says she used that tractor to get him out of the burn pile. Fair enough, but how do you get him out of the basement?
And some have said maybe he wasn't even shot at the downstairs.
Which makes
it could have been at the burn pile, but no one has said that in court. So
if she did it, I would argue she had to have shot him at the burn pile while he's tending the burn pile. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Prosecution hasn't gone down that path.
No. Let's go back in and pick up more of the youngest daughter, Amanda Farris Bruce. On the stand, she's the one sibling that thinks Mom didn't do it.
He didn't grab me by the arm, but he just turned and he put his hand on the door and he said, I'm gonna go look for a missing gun. And I'm like, and I kind of like, I remember pulling back and I was like, what does he mean? And I looked at Mama and I was like, what is he talking about? And she was like, I don't know. And so he went into the house. And
so he was the first one in the house before you went in there?
He walked in the door first. I don't know where he went, because when I went straight up the stairs. I looked upstairs, I looked on the middle floor, and then I went to the bottom floor. And then that's when I proceeded to go outside.
Did you go up these stairs?
Correct.
And that's just walking straight in the door?
Straight in the door.
And if you take a right here, is that the kitchen?
Correct.
Okay. And that's looking back out that door?
Yes.
And you went upstairs. What did you do upstairs?
Just looked to see if he was anywhere. There was a door that went to like an attic, like a walk-in attic, and I checked everywhere.
Okay. So this was the kitchen. Obviously, there's no furniture or anything, but this is the general layout of the home at the time.
Correct.
All right. So where did you go next after going upstairs?
I just walked to the main level. I don't know if I walked in the master bedroom. That would have been to the right, straight back from there. And then I walked in the basement.
Where did you go in the basement?
Probably into my dad's room. That would have been in that hallway right there.
Going towards these doors here?
No, the other way.
The other direction?
His bedroom was there, and then he had a bathroom that was over there straight back too. I probably would have looked there, I assume, just to see if he was there, since it was his room, and there was the living room, and then I just walked straight into his office because you could pass by the theater room, and I went into his office and he wasn't in there.
Okay, so this thing they've got listed on this Thrasher 17, this workshop, that was his office?
Yes.
Okay. And nothing, when you walked down into the basement, did you see anything out of place?
No.
And because you'd been down there, I mean, how often would you go to the basement?
I mean, every time we were over there, we would probably most likely go down in the basement because my dad was always working in his office.
So when you were down there, did you notice anything, you know, this looks like a bunch of very fine furniture. Did you notice anything broken?
Mm-mm.
Did you, I mean, what's underneath these candles appears to be glass fixtures holding up the candles.
Correct.
Anything out of place?
No.
Did you notice any blood?
No.
Now, had you been there the weekend before, did you ever notice anything about your father being bit by a dog or anything like that?
Yes, when we walked into Jay Christopher's, my husband and I was on the right, he was on the left, and my dad was in front of us, and he was walking up the stairs, because it was like a few stairs to go up into Jay Christopher's, I believe, and it was an awful, like, purple dog bite on the back side of his leg, like right above that, whatever, I guess that tendon that is. And my husband said, "Damn, Gary, like, what happened to your leg?" He said, "That damn dog bit me," meaning Motley, her little black, her little terrier dog.
So Motley was a kind of an ankle biter.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yes, I don't like that dog.
For lack of a better term. But you saw with your own eyes this injury to your dad's leg.
Yes, it was bad.
And it was from the weekend before his death.
It was purple by the time I saw it, and red. It looked bad.
Okay.
Enough for us to notice it.
So you walked past this dining room. These pictures were taken on the day of the 5th. This is Thrasher 81. You walked past this dining room, and this is how it looked?
Yes, sir.
On that day? You notice anything broken or out of place there?
No.
This was your mom's room?
Correct.
Where was the mudroom in the house?
You just passed it. There was like the mudroom was the long kind of hallway, and it had a desk and cabinets, and then that was off of the mudroom, and it had the washer and dryer. My dad had like his cowboy hat hung up on the wall to the left there. And that was the mudroom, and then there was a pantry.
This is your dad's cowboy hat?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is Motley's bed?
Yeah, well, all the dogs' bed.
How many dogs lived in the house?
Too many. We had Motley, Lucy. One time we had what we called Elizabeth Taylor. She was a little teacup Shih Tzu. They had Luke, Leroy. They were the biggest white labs I've ever seen in my entire life. And then Scott had a Chihuahua. And I think that's all the dogs he had. I know he had some cats too, but the cats never came in the house.
Did your dad tell you where he was bitten by the dog?
For Motley?
Yes.
I mean, it was on the back of his leg.
Well, no. Where in the house? Where was he when it? Did he say?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So you never would have seen any of these droplets of alleged blood?
No.
And you went down these very stairs on this same day, yes?
And many times after that.
Walk past these floors?
I would not have been looking.
And the furniture would have been exactly like this on that day?
Yes.
Did Scott ever tell you that this was the drawer where he said the gun was missing from?
No.
Okay. Did you check for any missing guns?
No.
Let's go back to when he said that. He goes in the house. What did he do next?
I don't know what he did. I just know he said, I'm going to go look for missing guns, and I was so taken back because our family doesn't do guns. My dad had like old shotguns that he kept in, whether my mother's, our grandfather's, they were family
Kind of in
guns.
this picture above.
Yeah, that was like an old antique gun that belonged to my mother's side of the family. But my dad had like shotguns because he would, I don't know if he went like with his law partners or something, but they would go like dove hunting, I guess, and things like that. So I always remember, as long as I can remember, there were shotguns in like those big, long zip-up cases. But it's like, as far as like small guns, no.
No. So you never saw any in that house?
No.
Never saw any revolvers?
We would have never owned any.
So even back at y'all called it Hampton Hall?
Mm-hmm.
So you never saw a small snub-nose revolver at that house?
It was only shotguns.
Did Chris ever tell you he found a snub-nose revolver?
No.
Back at Hampton Hall in the 2012 era? Okay. Or Scott?
No.
Okay.
The only handgun that I knew of back in Hampton Hall was when my brother was in the Army. It was a black handgun, and he had gotten it, I guess, after he got in the Army. I don't know. That was the only one I ever remember seeing ever.
Okay, let's bring in Lara Uretzian before we hit a break here. This is the first time that the defense has used Amanda to point the finger really at Scott specifically with that, and she was able to repeat it a couple times that Gary's missing, and Scott says, I'm going to go look for a missing gun.
That's huge.
Yeah, why is he looking for a gun if we haven't even found Dad? Where's the correlation? Of course, that for a juror, maybe, Lara, hits home.
You're right, and especially when you juxtapose that and compare it to the mom's reaction to what the mom says, and it's very something reasonable and you would expect from a mom who sees her daughter, and I'm sure they're close, and the first thing she says, we can't find your dad, and she seems to be acting in a more concerned way, but then when she sees her brother, what does he say? The first thing he says is a gun that's missing. And why would anybody mention a gun? Why does he think a gun is missing? When did he figure that out? There's a lot of questions out there that I'm sure the jury's also thinking, right? Why then? Why at that moment? Why are we jumping to that? And how come Amanda's never seen this gun? She's never seen a revolver. She's seen shotguns, but she's testified that this was not the kind of family that had revolvers. Maybe years ago, brother had a gun when he was in the Army, but so it's a little odd. It really stands out. And it's pretty clear where they're going with it.
Mm-hmm. And you factor in that Scott had these loose 38 rounds in his apartment, or the barn where he lived.
And then no one knew
no
that
38.
he was killed with a bullet until the autopsy was done and that information was brought to this family.
Hey, we found a bullet in your dad's rib. Otherwise, he was in the burn
Thought
pit.
he had a spell.
Yeah.
And fell in.
Spell.
That's what they've been calling it, a medical spell that he suffered from. Let's get to a break so we can get you back in for more testimony from Amanda. We're watching the burn pile murder trial happening in Cherokee County, Georgia. Stay with us.
Men is born evil.
So you chose bad.
On the next Interview with a Killer.
You created the plan.
I didn't actually shoot her.
You did murder her, though.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? Did it occur to you that you had just gone from troubled teen to teenage murderer? What was the plan?
She needed payback.
Payback with her life?
Interview with a Killer. New episode Sunday, 8/7 Central. Only on Court TV.
I'm Matt Johnson in North Georgia covering the burn pile murder trial. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Let's get you back inside of that Georgia courtroom where we have been following testimony in the burn pile murder trial for defendant Melody Walker Farris.
She's accused of killing her husband, Gary. Investigators believe she shot him and then burned his body in a fire pit on their property.
Let's go back into the courtroom. We're picking it up right where we left off. The Farris' youngest daughter, Amanda, is on the stand.
So you walked down here and you knew Scott had been in the house, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't see any of these droplets of blood?
No.
I'm fast forwarding because there's one image I specifically want to ask you. It may be easier to go to the... Were you ever made aware that a bullet was found right there under that ottoman?
The only time I was ever aware of a bullet was during the preliminary hearing.
Okay, that's the first time you'd ever heard of that?
Correct.
And you don't know if that was, you didn't know anything about it?
No, and I would have never looked there.
So you never saw this bullet?
No.
Laying in the floor?
No.
Do you find it odd that there's nothing around that bullet?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing that would have caught your imagination. No blood, no holes in the chair, nothing. It's just this bullet lying next to a piece of carpet.
If you compare it to all your Netflix documentaries, no, it doesn't make any sense.
So you never saw that?
No.
Okay, so Scott went in the house first before anybody else.
Correct.
That morning. Then what did Scott do? What did everybody do?
I don't remember where he went. I know that I went out my dad's office, and you could walk down because I knew he was making the burn pile on like July 3rd because I remember Chris went over there and all of that, and that was known. And so I had walked down, and my mother came up shortly behind me, and I saw one stream of like smoke coming off of the top of it. And there was like one stick that was laying by the side, and I just picked it up and tossed it on there, and she was there, and I was like, it's still like smoldering. She was like, yeah, it's gonna be hot for a while. And I was like, okay. And I turned around and looked up, and Scott was standing at the top of the hill, like where the driveway is, with both arms on his hips, just staring down at us. And at the time, I was just like, mental image, I guess, and I was just like, okay. So I walked the edge of the property because...
There's a pretty steep hill there. Did you go all the way down that steep hill?
I didn't think it was steep, but I went down there. I mean, I had probably had sandals on, but I walked all the way down. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking something happened to my dad. He's been out here working on the property, may have fallen out. Let's go look for him. So I'm searching everywhere. And I go walk that property line, and I go over the dam that's by the left of the pond if you're standing on that side. And I walked up to the barn, probably walked either through the barn or around the barn. I don't really remember.
Now, I ask you this. Do you ever remember around this time Scott saying anything about the placement of the tractor? Did he bring that up? Did you hear that?
No.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Where you walked?
Just walked up there, and I was calling out his name, trying to find him. I was getting desperate at this point and hoping I would find him. And I just had this gut feeling that something was wrong. And I had turned and walked down the driveway, and I was standing right as the driveway dips, and Scott calls me.
On your phone?
On my phone. And I'm looking over the pond and kind of just standing there at the vents, and he goes, Amanda, like something to the tune of like, Daddy's in this burn pile. Like, I know what I've seen. I've been in Iraq. I know what burned bodies looked like. And I'm just sitting there on the phone going, what are you talking about? And he was like, there's something in this burn pile. And I was like, what are you talking about? And pure just denial, I guess. And he hung up the phone or I hung up, but I immediately called Chad and I said, you need to get here right now. This is what Scott is saying, and you need to come get Cameron. You have to come get your daughter. And next thing I know, I don't know if he walked over. I mean, everything, your whole world stops. And he came over and grabbed me by the arm as hard as he could, and he got in my face.
All right, need a commercial break here. When we come back, Matt Johnson's going to join us from Cherokee County, Georgia. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae along with Ted Rollins. Thanks so much for following along with us as we watch the defense's case that's underway in the burn pile murder trial for Melody Farris happening in Cherokee County, Georgia.
She's accused of killing her husband, Gary. Prosecutors say she shot him and then burned his body in a fire pit. The jury viewed that property last week. The defense says there's no evidence that Melody possessed a gun, shot her husband, or could move his 300-pound body and get him onto the fire pit. Attorneys also say the state's own medical examiner couldn't confirm how Gary actually died.
And so what we're listening to now is the fourth of Melody and Gary's children who is testifying. She's the only child, Amanda Farris, who's testifying for the defense on behalf of her mother. Let's pick it up right where we're leaving off. She is describing just how difficult it was the day that they couldn't find her father and then the realization of where his body was.
Who are we talking about?
Scott. He got in my face and he screamed at me. He said, I know what I saw. I know what it is, Amanda. And I was just, again, going like, what? And next thing I know, he said he called the 911, paramedics, whatever, and I walk up to the driveway. There's like a fork in the road.
I have to ask you this question and I'll move on from this topic quickly. But you walked down to the burn pile earlier. And you and your mom looked at it together.
Briefly.
And neither one of you saw what you would believe to have been human remains.
Thank God, no.
But you say Scott was up behind you on the hill just staring at you both.
Yes.
Okay. So going back to when the paramedics arrived, what happened next?
I was standing in the driveway and my mom had walked up. And I was like, what is going on? She said, I don't know. She just kept saying, I don't know. And I was just in shock at this point. And next thing I know, fire trucks, paramedics and all of this. And she just said, why is he holding them up at the end of the driveway? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea, and it felt like an eternity, and I refused to go over there. I didn't want to go over there, and this poor paramedic, I'll never forget him. He was standing there with a gurney, and he goes, I'm so sorry for your loss. And that was the first time anybody ever told me about my dad being dead. And I said, so you're telling me that my dad is in that burn pile back there? And he just looked at me in shock and was just like, he couldn't say anything back. And Chris was sitting on the bed of his truck, just looking down at the ground. He didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything? No. And what was your brother Scott doing at that time?
I don't know. I guess they were over there, him and my mom. I don't know.
Did your brother, and I think I'm going to ask the judge after this question to go ahead and break here, because then we're going to go ahead and start talking about what happened after this day. But did your brother say anything else concerning at that time? And he'd mentioned a gun. Did he say anything else that resonates in your memory?
Which one, Chris or Scott?
Either one.
No, Chris, no.
What about Scott?
I don't think I talked to Scott much after that. I think he was off. I don't really recall. I really felt like every bone in my body was broken at that point. I remember talking to Hayes for a little bit and standing at the fence. And he could have told me I had purple hair and 5 eyes that I wouldn't have recalled. And I just kept going through my head of just like, if he's gone, he's like, our life has changed forever. And it was awful. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
I'm going to show you what has been previously marked as, I believe, bot song 4. Is this you?
Yes.
Were you aware there was a trail camera on the property?
No, not really.
Okay. And is this your mother?
Yes.
Okay. And that's bot song 5. And who is this?
Scott.
Is that also Scott?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you a question, and then I think we should probably go ahead and break before we move on to the next phase. Would it shock you to know that Scott Farris deleted, that's a picture of him backing away from the phone, from the trail cam after deleting the trail cam at that very moment as y'all are searching for your daddy?
Yes. It would shock me. We were looking for my dad. Why? I don't, like, again, I didn't know that he had a trail camera, but that is concerning.
Judge, I think we should break.
It's here. So we'll break for lunch. We're going to take an hour, so we'll start back up at 1 o'clock.
So let's move forward post July the 5th. What did you notice about the change in your family dynamics?
After that had happened, I immediately had to take care of my mom. It was probably July 6th. All of my brothers and sister looked at me and said, all right, you take her. And so I immediately had her with me. She lived with us, I can't tell you how long, months. Because she didn't
This
want
was in 2018.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
After everything had happened, this was like July 6th forward. And she lived with us. She didn't want to go back to the property. Eventually it came to the point of like, okay, you can go now. And so she went back, but I had to help pay for house insurance and car insurance and power bills and things like that. So I was kind of having to take care of the situation from that point. But Emily went back to Tennessee. Chris was in Atlanta, and Scott, I think, was staying at somebody's house, I guess. So we went back to the property once it was, well, I know he went back to the property after it was released. But I don't know if he stayed with a friend for a while.
Okay. Were you ever part of any discussions with an attorney who told everybody not to talk?
Correct.
Okay.
On July 6th, I guess it was. I don't remember.
Friday, the next day?
Yes. It would have, somebody, I don't know who it was, maybe it was a consensus thing, but essentially it was, we needed somebody to help us. We didn't know what was going on.
Here, from that time period, if you need to look for the dates.
I didn't know what to do at that moment, but I knew that, what you see on TV, let's get an attorney to handle it. And somebody gave me Eric Durlacker's number. I did not have it, so somebody gave it to me. I don't know if it was one of my siblings or my mom. I have no idea. I can't remember. So I called him and I said, I need help. I don't know what to do. I need somebody to guide me through this or take care of it, really is what I wanted. I was like, take care of this.
Was this, by the way, and sorry to cut you off,
You're fine.
but timeline-wise, was this while your mother was being interviewed by Detective Hayes?
Correct.
Okay.
This was the day of the 6th, so
Okay.
Friday. And I called Eric, I don't know what time, and he just gave me Manny's number and told them that Deputy Hayes had my mother in the room and was questioning Scott, and they said, well, just let them know that she has an attorney. And we told them a couple of times, but she stayed in there for another hour or so. And then she finally came out. We went to the attorney's office. Everybody as a family went down there.
And that's when he said, y'all stop talking. Everybody stop talking.
Correct.
Anybody who knows anybody, stop talking.
Correct.
Okay. So when did it become apparent, or what could you tell from Scott and Chris breaking off from the family?
They eventually got very angry and irritated. I know Chris got mad at me because I told one of the detectives, I think his name was Tommy, that he decided not to go on vacation. Apparently that was a problem. He said we aren't supposed to talk to the attorneys, so we were all on the same page.
You mean law enforcement?
Yes, sorry, law enforcement. That we should basically just go to the attorney if we have any questions and just to keep to ourselves, and that's it. And he was handling the situation, the attorney.
In this time period or ever before, had you ever heard your brother Scott say, this is my property?
Yes.
This is my house?
Multiple times. He flaunted the fact that that was his property. I almost kind of like joked in a way he kind of vicariously lived through my dad.
Kind of like the movie Step Brothers. You ever seen that?
I don't know if they took ownership of their dad's stuff.
Well,
but yeah,
okay.
I mean, in that same situation, and grown up, still living at home. Yes, I can
Okay.
see it in that aspect.
But he would claim things as his that were not his. That's fair to say.
They belonged to my mother and my father.
Okay. And you say, I mean, how often would you hear him say this?
He wouldn't say it like all the time, but it was always just like my farm, my property, my Kubota. He would get on social media. He would say, this is my property. I mean, he claimed ownership to it. That's for sure.
Okay. And speaking of social media, had you ever seen your brother shoot guns or anything like that?
He was in the military. He was always shooting guns at the house.
Okay.
From what I was heard and what he said.
Did you ever see any of his videos on social media?
No.
Okay. But you knew he was always shooting guns.
He was always doing something around there, but yeah, it was a known thing that they used to go and I don't know if he would hunt stuff. I don't really know how that works because there were so many houses that were in close proximity, but I know that he would have leisurely kind of shootings back there.
Okay. So going on through late July and things like that, just to kind of talk about it, were there any issues? Did you ever have any communication or talk to Rusty during that time?
No.
Had you ever met him yet?
No.
Okay. And that would have been what, later on, about 2019, that you communicated with Rusty Barton?
When she was arrested, that was the first time I personally spoke to him.
Okay.
That I can recall.
All right. But you'd known during this time, you'd heard about Rusty Barton, yes?
Yes, there were rumors, but I didn't know the depths of it until the preliminary hearing.
So that was in 2019?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Right about the time
Because she was
your
already
mother-
arrested at that point. So, yeah, I didn't know about all the meetings and all that kind of stuff. That was new to me at the preliminary hearing.
Okay. So going back to, tell me about the estate and how things were managed with the siblings for the family.
What do you mean?
Was your brother appointed as the executor of the estate?
Nobody was. The estate was locked down immediately when the house was locked down. My mother couldn't go down the road and get a sandwich if she wanted to. She was totally reliant on me.
Okay.
From day one.
Well, I guess I'm talking more about, there was properties that were owned by the family, and was your brother Chris ever appointed over that?
My sister at one point got a coroner's letter that we did not know about. My mother had tried to get a lady named Diane to help her figure out what needed to be done with the estate because it had been so long. And
all right, we need to slip on a commercial break. We get you back in the courtroom for more of this North Georgia case. A lot of family drama, the burn pile murder case. Stay with us. Welcome back to KTV Live along with Julia Janae. I'm Ted Rollins. We're watching this case out of Georgia. It's the case against Melody Farris.
She is accused of shooting and killing her husband, Gary, and then burning his body in a fire pit on their property. The defense wants to point to the couple's son, Scott, or one of this couple's other children as potential suspects in this case.
We're listening to testimony from Amanda Farris Bruce. Let's head back into the courtroom and pick it up. Still direct examination.
Had filed for, I don't know what you call it, for the estate, but he was given ownership of the estate, and we did not know.
Okay. Well, tell me how that went.
Not well. I know that it turned into, I texted Emily at one point and I said, Diane's told me that there's been money taken out and my dad owns the condo that my sister lived in Tuscaloosa, and said that it had, I don't know if it went into foreclosure or whatnot, but a property management company was in charge of, they would get the check and then Daddy, I assume, would give it to the mortgage company at that point, and it was not being done. So the condo was lost.
And that was the condo in Tuscaloosa?
Correct, and that's when I petitioned to have the third-party estate attorney. So none of us had our hands on it. It was purely an outside source, and I did not know that was an option until my mother spoke to Diane.
Okay. And so did they loop you in on any of this, Chris and Scott and Emily?
No.
Right, so you were just kind of left on the outside.
Nobody talked to me about it.
Right. And is that because you were the only one showing any support for your mother?
I had to take care of her. I had no option but to take care of her at that point. Emily ran off back to Tennessee, and Chris and Scott were no help. I financially took care of a lot that first year. It was really hard on us. But we did it because it had to be done. God forbid something happened to the house. And I mean, the mortgage was over almost probably $5,500 a month. And then the home insurance, I paid for that. So if anything were to happen to it, we wouldn't be in a really big situation, but that was $600 a month. Paid for the car insurance on all of the cars, including Scott's. And that's kind of where Scott and I fell out.
Over his car?
Over his car, because I was having to pay the car insurance and he didn't have a job at the time. And it was really hard to get money out of him. And I didn't have the money to be paying for all of that. So it just got into arguments, and it finally, when Jeff Restbridge, the state attorney, got appointed, I just said, please defer all of your questions to him, because it was a losing battle.
Did you ever become aware that Scott would call law enforcement, 911 on your mother pretty regularly in 2019? From
my mother.
Okay. Did you ever hear any of these calls, or did it come up on an altercation between the two of them?
No, she would always call me and say what was happening, and I told her she either needed to audio record it or video record it, or nobody was going to believe her.
Okay. Your father was a very large man. Mm-hmm. Do you know how much he weighed?
280, 290, 300.
Right in that area?
I mean, he was 6'5". I'm 5'7", and I came up to his chest, right about here.
Okay. How much do you think your mother weighs?
125 pounds soaking wet.
Okay. Does she have any physical conditions of note?
She had scoliosis really bad. She's had it all of her life.
How bad? Like, is her back?
Yeah, if you look at it, I mean, there's probably a couple inches difference from the side of her back to the other. She got kicked in the leg by one of the horses, and she was in a cast for a really long, one of those kind of, I think it was like a soft cast for a while, but she couldn't walk. She had to do rehabilitation on that. But other than that, I mean, she's been active, I guess you would say.
Your Honor, if I may have a moment. That's all at this time, Your Honor.
Hi, Mr. Ferguson.